Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Eerie News, and today is June 16th, 2023, Friday, June 15th. I'm sorry, 16th, 2023. And there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in Eerie world, if you know what I mean. And let's get off to the first one. And this one is out of Eerie News, and it's titled The Ghost of Lady Anne. All right, and many of you might already be familiar with the story of Lady Anne, who's Henry VIII's second wife, Henry VIII's second wife, Anne Boleyn. Now, it's not hard to believe a woman who started out as a mistress, became the wife, and was ultimately killed by her husband does not lie easy in her grave. The lady's name is Anne Boleyn. Now, Anne was born in an old medieval manor around 1500, and her great-grandfather, Sir Geoffrey Boleyn, bought the Tudor house in 1452. A structure had been erected there since the time of Edward the Confessor on 6,000 acres of land. About 100 years later, Sir Henry Hobart built Blickling Hall in Norfolk on the site of the old manor house. Anne's shade has been seen throughout the years, but unsurprisingly, May 19th, when she met her death in the Tower of London in 1536, is the most common date of her sighting. On the National Trust website, her appearance is described thus. As night falls, Anne Boleyn's ghost rides up to the house in a coach drawn by a headless horseman, with her own head on her lap. The moment the coach arrives in front of the house, it vanishes into thin air. Tradition also has it that when news of Anne's death reached Blickling Hall in 1536, 4 headless horses were seen dragging the body of a headless man across Norfolk. Blickling Hall is also haunted by Anne's father, Sir Thomas Boleyn, who lost 2 children to Henry's executioner. Sir Henry Hobart, who built Blickling, is another ghost who makes his presence known on the anniversary of his death by groaning from the west turret bedroom. Henry VIII seemed especially attracted to the Boleyn women. He was involved with Anne's sister Mary, and according to Sir George Throckmorton, he was involved also with Elizabeth Boleyn, their mother, even though Henry denied the relationship with Elizabeth. Mary Boleyn became Henry's mistress, even though she was married to a courtier named William Carey. It was rumored that one or both of her children were fathered by Henry. 2 years after Mary's marriage in 1520, Anne returned from the French court, where it was rumored she was engaged in many sexual liaisons, and the French king referred to her as the English mare. Anne joined the royal court as one of Queen Catherine of Aragon's maids of honor. By 1526, Henry was in pursuit of Anne. However, she refused to become his mistress. This propelled him to seek an annulment from his queen. Anne was crowned Queen of England in June 1533 and gave birth to Princess Elizabeth on September 7, 1533. Despite all the charges used to bring about Anne Boleyn's fate, it seemed the failure to produce a male heir for the crown was her undoing. Not that it did her much good, but according to Tudor expert Sandra Vasoli, evidence has been unearthed that Henry expressed regret of his hand in Anne's death. A message read, "The king acknowledges with great grief at his death the injuries he had done to the Lady Anne Boleyn and her daughter." The originator of the writing was a Franciscan friar, Andre Thevet, who lived at the friary attached to Greenwich Palace. He would have been 32 years old when Henry VIII died. He regularly heard the confessions of English courtiers. Makes you wonder what he did here, but anyway. Henry's true love, though, was thought to be Catherine of Aragon, whose failure to produce a male heir propelled him to set her aside, even though the annulment he sought was never recognized by the Roman Catholic Church. Ironically, Catherine died 6 months before Anne's execution. Anne was never accepted by the common people. They considered her a prostitute and called her the Great Whore. She was detested because Catherine of Aragon had been so loved, and they blamed her for alienating the king's affections. According to Sylvia Soberton, Elizabeth Holland, one of Anne's ladies in waiting, probably stayed with her at the tower during her incarceration. Bessie Holland was present during Anne's coronation. She was also the mistress of the Duke of Norfolk, Anne's uncle, which also explains how she was appointed as a lady-in-waiting to the Queen. Later she married Henry Reps and became known as Elizabeth Reps. Anne also had confidants which turned out to be spying on her while she was imprisoned in the Tower. Soberton said 4 women attending Anne would pass information on to Sir William Kingston, the constable of the Tower. The women were Mary, Kingston's wife, Margaret Coffin, wife of Anne's master of the horse, Lady Boleyn, Anne's aunt, and Mrs. Stoner, who may have been in charge of the behavior of the maids of honor. Even if Anne suspected that these women were spying on her, she talked frequently about subjects which led to the arrest of 5 men and strengthened the charges against her. On May Day, Anne visited Greenwich with Henry to watch a tilting match. The next day, she along with others were arrested on a charge of treason. She was beheaded 17 days later. Anne's ghost has been seen in different places, starting with Blickling Hall, her birthplace, Hever Castle, her childhood home, Hampton Court, Windsor Castle, the Tower of London, South Church, where her body was allegedly moved to after her original burial in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, and the Tower of London. Supposedly she was buried in secret under a black slab near where her Boleyn ancestors lay in repose. And Marwell Hall, where the Seymours lived between 1530 to 1638. Marwell Hall at the Yew Tree Walk is where Henry VIII and Jane Seymour, her rival, strolled while she was being held at the Tower of London. Henry wed Jane Seymour 11 days after Anne's execution. At Hampton Court, she is seen wearing a blue dress. This is the same place Jane Seymour died 15 months after her marriage, and just a few days after she gave birth to Prince Edward. Catherine Howard, Henry's 5th wife, who also met the executioner by Henry's order, is said to haunt Hampton Court. Anne's ghost has been seen standing at a window in the Dean's Cloister at Windsor Castle. There she keeps company with her daughter Elizabeth I and Henry, both which have been heard and sighted. At Blickling Hall, it's not only Anne, but her brother George Boleyn, Lord Rochford, who is seen being dragged by 4 headless horses. His headless apparition is seen wandering around the estate. In some stories, the driver of the coach that bring Anne to Blickling Hall is her father, Sir Thomas Boleyn. Once he drops her off, he continues on his way, pursued by screaming demons that curse him for his betrayal. He is forced to flee over 12 bridges that lie between Wroxham and Blickling for a millennium as a penance. Hever Castle, where Anne grew up, was built in the 13th century. When the Boleyn family bought the castle in the 16th century, they rebuilt much of the castle. Anne is seen every Christmas Eve, crossing the bridge over the River Eden. She's also seen standing under the great oak where Henry wooed her. The Tower of London is Anne's favorite haunt. It is a place soaked in suffering and blood built by William the Conqueror in 1078. Anne has been seen in the White Tower, the Queen's House, Tower Green, where the scaffold was erected, and the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula. Nicholas Sander, a recusant born in 1530, described Anne this way. Anne Boleyn was rather tall of stature, with black hair and an oval face of sallow complexion, as if troubled with jaundice. She had a projecting tooth under the upper lip, and on her right hand 6 fingers. There was a large wen under her chin, and therefore, to hide its ugliness, she wore a high dress covering her throat. In this she was followed by the ladies of court, who also wore high dresses, having before been in the habit of leaving their necks and upper portion of their persons uncovered. She was handsome to look at, with a pretty mouth. In 1817, a sentry at the White Tower died from a heart attack after seeing the ghost of Anne Boleyn on a staircase. In 1864, a guard outside the Queen's house saw a woman in white, veiled in mist. She wore a gown from Tudor times and a French hood, but she had no face. He challenged the figure, which turned toward him. He thrust forward with his bayonet, and it passed through the figure. He fainted. Later he was court-martialed for falling asleep during his watch. However, he was found not guilty when other eyewitnesses said they had seen the headless woman on Tower Green that same night. An officer saw the form from a window in the bloody tower, and he heard the sentry yelling and saw him thrust his bayonet through the misty figure. The ghost passed through the bayonet and the sentry himself. In the Chapel Royal of St. Peter ad Vincula, where Anne is supposedly buried, another sighting was had in 1882. A captain of the guard saw a light burning in the locked chapel. It was very late at night. He found a ladder and looked in through the chapel window. He described it thus. Slowly down the aisle moved a stately procession of knights and ladies, attired in ancient costumes, and in front walked an elegant female whose face was averted from him, but whose figure greatly resembled the one he had seen in reputed portraits of Anne Boleyn. After having repeatedly paced the chapel, the entire procession, together with the light, disappeared. In 1929, Anne Boleyn's shade was reported at a new golf course in London. She was said to be along Boleyn Walk, a long avenue adjoining the 16th and 17th fairways. This route led to the old hunting lodge. She was seen in the shade of the trees, even in daytime. Once this place was the Bishop's Palace, which was a favorite hunting ground for Henry VIII. The ruins of his hunting lodge adjoined one of the tees on the new course. Located in Surrey, the course was the Addison Palace Golf Club. It was built in 1772 by Alderman Tredthick, Lord Mayor of London. However, the site once had another house owned by the family of Legge, built during Norman times. In 1807, the manor and lands were bought for the Archbishop of Canterbury, and for more than 100 years the archbishops lived there, and 5 of them were buried in the park. In 1907, the palace and 1,200 acres were bought by the late Mr. English, a South African millionaire. He improved it, and an architect was converting the building to a clubhouse, including a conversion of the chapel, which he stated had never been consecrated, into a dining room. It's believed the charges against Anne Boleyn were manufactured in order for Henry to marry Jane Seymour. Many believe she would have been too worldly to risk her position as queen and the paternity of any heir she could produce, including the Princess Elizabeth, by being unfaithful. But perhaps Anne faced a dire problem that forced her to take a lover, spurred by expediency. Henry, once fit, was in his mid-40s during a time when the average lifespan was 35 years of age. By the time of their marriage, Henry was not the man he used to be. In 1527, he injured his foot, and the same year he suffered from a sore leg. This is believed to be the first time a reference was made to an ulcerated wound on his thigh. In January 1536, he was unseated during a joust, and the horse landed on top of him. He was unconscious for 2 hours, and his legs were hurt, possibly fractured. Anne miscarried a pregnancy shortly after the incident. This was the 3rd pregnancy she lost. Henry suffered from headaches after the head injury, and his behavior deteriorated. The painful wound in his thigh returned. The ulcers were purulent and seeped. He had also gained a lot of weight. Perhaps visits from Henry to Anne's bed were few and far between. George Bernard, a history professor at Southampton University, examined a poem written in 1545, 9 years after Anne's execution. It was written by Lancelot de Carles, the French ambassador to Henry's court. It is titled, A Letter Containing the Criminal Charges Laid Against Queen Anne Boleyn of England, and suggests she was guilty of adultery after all. It describes where Anne was said to despise her marriage and had malice against the king. The indictment said that by base conversations and kisses, touching gifts, and other famous incitations, she seduced men. Mark Smeaton, Sir Henry Norris, Sir Francis Weston, and Sir William Breton were accused of adultery along with Anne's brother George. According to Bernard, the poem indicates that Anne's indiscretions were revealed after an argument between a privy councillor and his sister, who he accused of promiscuity. She pointed out the queen was much worse, to a much higher fault that is much more damaging. The professor believes the woman was Elizabeth, Countess of Worcester. Comments in contemporary letters backed up the poem. The Countess was one of Anne Boleyn's ladies in her privy chamber. She testified against Anne Boleyn, claiming she engaged in several adulterous acts. Bernard said, "It's not that I've discovered the poem for the first time. It's been known to scholars because an edition was printed in the 20s. But on the whole, scholars have dismissed it because it's a literary source. But it seems to me that it presents a plausible scenario. We can identify the accuser as the Countess of Worcester, and we can link her to the Queen." Long before her arrest, Anne probably suspected only a pregnancy with a 50% chance of producing a male would assure her future as the Queen. Wherever the truth lies, if regrets are an ingredient for a haunting, Anne Boleyn had plenty to spare. And it's true, it makes you wonder. She didn't seem to be a stupid woman, but let's face it, Henry divorced or set aside Catherine to marry her younger woman, thinking he was going to get the heir he wanted, and she didn't produce. And who knows, maybe he was not in the best of health. He was not the young man he once was. It's funny because he did have an illegitimate son with another lady in the court, and if it's true what they're saying, that he might have been the father of one or both of the children that Anne Boleyn's sister had, when he took her as his mistress. So it just seems he had just bad luck when picking out women to produce his heir. So let's go on to and by the way, shows you that all that privilege that they had didn't come for nothing. Everybody lost their head there. All right. Our next story is out of the Smithsonian Magazine. It's titled "Unraveling the Secrets of the Long-Lost Shipwrecks in the Bahamas." And treasure hunters have long been obsessed with retrieving shiny gold doubloons and dazzling jewels from shipwrecks in the Bahamas. But these wrecks are worth far more than the treasures they hide below the ocean surface. They also offer a window into the past, revealing new information about politics, shipping routes, navigation, shipbuilding, slavery, and more. Now, researchers want to shine a light on the sunken vessels' rich archaeological, historical, and cultural value. To start, they've created a new master map of the wrecks surrounding some of the Bahamas Islands in the West Atlantic Ocean. The new map and accompanying findings will go on display this fall as part of an interactive exhibition at the Bahamas Maritime Museum. Beyond seaborne conquistadors hauling gold, silver, emeralds, and pearls back to Spain, mapping the wrecks of the Bahamas has uncovered the forgotten lives of merchants, warships, fishermen, and even ancient salvors. James Jenny, a maritime historian who led research efforts for the project, told the magazine, "The project is a collaboration between Jenny and Allen Exploration, a company partnering with the Bahamian government to study the area's shipwrecks and maritime history. Perhaps most famously, Allen's exploration team has been surveying and recovering treasures from the wreck of the Maravillas, a Spanish ship loaded with gold, silver, and gems that sank in 1656. In our dives to explore the Maravillas, we trip over wreck after wreck," says Carl Allen, the company's founder, in a statement. "For decades, the Bahamas' lost ships have been silent phantoms. So many ships of war and trade sailed through and sank in these waters. Finally, we're figuring out their names, stories, and the excitement of what's still down there." After poring over archival materials dating between 1526 and 1976, researchers identified and mapped 176 shipwrecks in a region surrounding Grand Bahama, Great Abaco, and other islands in the archipelago. They also made a database with key facts about each vessel, including its name, the date it sank, its cargo, the type of disaster that struck, and its country. From that information, they noticed some patterns. For instance, American ships accounted for 52% of the wrecks, followed by Britain with 24% and Spain with 13%. The majority of the wrecks, some 73%, occurred off an area known as Western Little Bahama Bank. And while the researchers found a smattering of ships from the 16th, 17th, and 18th century, the majority, 82%, date to the 19th century. Most were also merchant vessels, carrying 251 different kinds of cargo, which ranged from molasses and sugar to lumber and military provisions. Some were also transporting whiskey, rum, Madeira wine, coconuts, brandy, bacon, fish, potatoes, salt, and other food and beverages. Cotton was also a particularly popular and profitable type of cargo. While hurricanes plagued the Bahamas, most of the ships sunk after running into reefs or island shores, according to the researchers. This made them easy pickings for divers who could salvage and sell their cargoes. According to the historical records, Bahamian salvors retrieved cargo from 60 ships between 1656 and 1908, grabbing gunpowder, cotton, sugar, molasses, and nearly anything else they could get their hands on. For their efforts, they typically took home between 45 and 66% of the cargo's value, per the researchers. Of the 176 shipwrecks, researchers recently found archival materials. Only 19 have been identified underwater so far, meaning the area is ripe for further hands-on exploration. Without exploring the historical archives, we have no clues about the total maritime story of the Bahamas, especially the richness of cargoes traded. Michael Pateman, director of the Bahamas Maritime Museum, said, "History is like looking at a painting of a ship. Diving lets you board that lost ship and learn what really happened in the past. Together you get a 3D picture." The project may also someday help government and organizations take steps to preserve the region's unique underwater cultural heritage. As Sean Kingsley, a marine archaeologist who worked on the project, says, "You can't manage what you don't know exists." Moving forward, the researchers also hope to expand their historical research. No one really knows how many ships are resting on the seafloor in this region, but some estimates put the number at more than 5,000. As Allen says in a statement, the potential for maritime archaeology in the Bahamas is extremely bright. And I have been there. I've been in the Bahamas, and one of the things that helps is not only the shallow waters, but if you can see in this picture, for those of you watching, it's very, very clear. It's like translucent. It's like glass. All right. You can see very easily, even when you're on top of the water down to below. So that usually helps. So, on to the next story. And this is also out of Eerie News. And this pertains, part of the story, to something that's recently been happening a lot, which is some eruptions and volcanoes that have been going off in different parts of the world. But this one has to do with the one in Hawaii. This is titled Kilauea. I'm killing this. Volcano erupts. Kilauea. Yeah. The Kilauea volcano erupted on June 7, 2023, but this is not the first time. In 1997, a lava flow destroyed a 700-year-old temple where human sacrifices were carried out. Right? And this is, like I said, only one volcano of several that have all erupted around maybe within a couple of weeks of each other. Kilauea is the most active volcano on the island of Hawaii and one of the most active in the world. The volcano is known as the home of the goddess Pele, where she resides in a persistently active crater known as Halemaumau. In 1997, Kilauea spewed forth lava that inched toward Wahaulahio, which in ancient times was known as Ahaula. This was the first sacrificial temple built on Hawaii by Pau natives. The 5-foot-high walls surrounding it did not stop the lava. Prior to this, many thought Pele would spare the temple. The origins of the temple are tied to the legend of Pau, who came to Hawaii from Tahiti or Samoa in the 13th century. Archaeologists believe this individual did not exist. However, natives believe he was the one responsible for introducing the custom of the Lakini Hau. Haus are sacred places where humans and animal blood sacrifices were offered. Whether he existed or not, he is credited with erecting the temple near Wahaula, or Redmouth. Only royalty could worship at this temple until 1819. However, even female royal members were not allowed beyond the first terrace. In other words, even among them, only males in the royal family could go into the inner sanctum. King Kamehameha I, who died in 1819, dedicated the place to the war god Kuka Ilimoku. Prior to Pao's arrival and the changes he made to religious practice and worship rituals, ceremonies conducted by the high chief and his priests could be observed by the congregation. Pao designed the temples with high stone walls which would hide the ceremonies from the masses. Pao also instituted hereditary priesthood and wooden temple images. The Wahala Hao was so forbidden that the smoke of its fires that fell upon any person or a chief would be punishable by death. It would be seen as a sacrifice to the gods of the temple. Human sacrifices would always be killed in the main entrance to the Hao. Mokini Hao at Kohala was the second temple Pao ordered to be constructed. Prior to the arrival of Christian missionaries, the chiefs destroyed the grass houses where the priests lived. They burned the wooden idols, images on the wall, and anything combustible, leaving only the walls and the stone floors. The last sacrifice is believed to have occurred in 1809 when Kahumanu, married to King Kamehameha for 34 years, took as her lover 19-year-old Kanihuni. The young man was put to death by strangulation at Papaena'ena'hau or Leahi, which is Diamond Head, for committing adultery with Ka'ahumanu. I'm sorry, I'm slaughtering these Hawaiian names. Even though human sacrifices stopped in the early 19th century, evidence of the practice could still be found in areas around the Hao. According to Thrum, who wrote a book in 1904, this is what he described. At our visit to the scene, we were shown the small cove deep down the jagged bluffs of Puna's coastline at the southern end of Wahula premises, where the bones of the slain were washed, and to this day is known as Holoinaiwi. In other words, the discarded bones were still there, even though they were not practicing sacrifices anymore. Along the North Kohala coast is the Mokini Luakini Hao, a temple dedicated for the purpose of human sacrifice. It is believed to have been constructed around 480 AD with a 6-foot high wall surrounding it. Around 1000 to 1300 AD, religious traditions changed to include human sacrifice. It's estimated that thousands were killed at the temple. They were flayed and their bones used for practical purposes, such as creating a fish hook. But this was not the only site dedicated to human sacrifice. There's Hale o Kapuni, just offshore, and Pelican Bay, that was used to appropriate the shark god Kahuhu, that was worshipped as a protector. The victims were taken to a stone in the ocean, where they were left to be eaten by sharks. The last sighting of the ruins was during low tides in the 1950s. It is now underwater and what is purported to be a breeding ground for sharks. There was a chief named Alapai who would sit on a rock in the shade of a large kiawe tree on the shore above Mailekini Hao. He was known to use human flesh for shark bait and would watch from this point as sharks would come to eat the human remains left as offerings for them. Some high chiefs would catch sharks as a sport, and this custom suggests they conditioned the sharks to eat the human flesh in the offshore temple so they could be easily noosed. There were different occasions that demanded a sacrifice. It could be as mundane as the construction of a house or canoe, in preparation for war, to end pestilence, and breaking any societal taboos. Victims are sacrificed by strangulation, bludgeoning, burning, burial, drowning, being crushed under a newly built canoe, and decapitation. Some believe the practice of human sacrifice was used to enforce a strict class system and inhibit any type of egalitarian structure among the populace. It is no surprise to find that sacrificial victims were often of a lower class, including slaves. The enforcers were chiefs and high priests. There was also belief that chiefs and kings were part of a superior godlike race. Regardless of class, offending a social elite could be punishable by death as part of a sacrifice. The elite were not always judged by this strict law, even when it came to breaking taboos. A wealthy person could pay reparation instead of being directly punished. They would just substitute the life of a slave for their own if they had broken a major taboo. As an example, in 1804, Kamehameha was en route to invade Kauai. and with an army of 8,000 men he stopped at Oahu. Yellow fever broke out among the men, and within a few days over 65% of his troops were dead. Kamehameha supposed this could be repaired by sacrifice, and he went to the Hau at Wititi. This is what described happened there. The priest recommended a 10-day taboo, the sacrifice of 3 human victims, 400 hogs, as many coconuts, and an equal number of branches of plantains. 3 men who had been guilty of the enormous turpitude of eating coconuts with the old queen were accordingly seized and led to the marae. But there being yet 3 days before the offerings could be duly presented, the eyes of the victims were scooped out, the bones of their arms and legs were broken, and they were then deposited in a house to await the coup de grace on the day of sacrifice. While these maimed and miserable creatures were in the height of their sufferings, some persons, moved by curiosity, visited them in person and found them neither raving nor desponding, but sullenly singing the national haru or anthem, dull as the drone of a bagpipe and hardly more variable, as though they were insensible of the past and indifferent to the future. When the slaughtering time arrived, one of them was placed under the legs of the idol, and the other 2 were laid with the hogs and fruit upon the altar frame. They were then beaten with clubs upon the shoulders till they died of the blows. This was told us by an eyewitness of the murderous spectacle, and thus men kill one another and think that they do God service. This was part of the journal of Tyman and Bennett, dating back to 1832. Ancient Hawaii had a caste system, with a high-ranking class known as the alii, to the commoners, or maka'aina. A middle class was the konohiki. Priests or kahunas had a different status altogether. The lowest of all were the kawa, or untouchables. They were born into this class and were strongly despised. They would be punished with death if they ate, slept, or let their shadow fall on an ordinary person. Unlike other cultures, a child's status was mostly determined by the mother's rank, and it would not be hurt if the father was lower than the mother. Kapu was a system of prohibitions and prescriptions. The most important was held by the chief, which required others of lower ranks to immediately lie face down upon the ground in their presence. The penalty of disobedience was death. Most Polynesian societies allowed marriage with others in their same status. However, in Hawaii, a high chief would be wed to the nearest possible female relative, which included marriage between brothers and sisters. This was dubbed Hawaiian royal incest, marriage between blood relatives of the first degree among the alii. Children born of the union would be of highest rank, equal to those of the gods. The most perfect and revered union was that of a full brother and sister of the highest rank. Hikla Hau Kealakekua Bay was visited by Captain James Hook in 1778 through 1779. At this time, the place was known as the Sandwich Islands. It is the site of a Luakini Hau, which measured 250 feet long by 150 feet wide. Cook performed the first Christian ceremony in Hawaii, which was a funeral rite for one of his crew. Cook stayed there a month. At first, the natives had seen Cook as an incarnation of their god Lono, but when the ship returned 3 weeks later because a mast had broken, the natives realized there was nothing divine about them. In addition, the funeral ceremony performed by Cook confirmed that they were mortal. A boat from Cook's ship, the Discovery, disappeared, and his crew took a local man hostage. Kalani Opu'u, a high chief, came to the ship to discuss the situation, and it's believed that Cook decided to take him hostage instead. This resulted in the natives gathering on the beach, many with weapons, and chasing the English off the bay. A skirmish broke out, and Cook was stabbed to death in the shallow waters off the shore. 4 crewmen were killed, as well as 16 Hawaiians. William Bligh, years before he became commander of the HMS Bounty, claimed to have watched from the Resolution as Cook's body was dragged up a hill and taken to a village where it was torn to pieces. There were rumors that Cook had been cannibalized, but this was not a practice of the natives. It is believed his body was prepared the same as a chief. This was done by disemboweling the torso and then baking the body to remove the flesh. The bones were prepared with care since they are considered sacred in Hawaiian culture. Cook's bones were given out among the villages. Some of his remains were returned to the crew of the Resolution, which gave him a burial at sea. This had been Cook's third expedition. And I was surprised to learn that Hawaiians had a caste system. I mean, like, between the way up and the about the untouchables, I had only heard of things like the untouchables as in India. I was not aware that Hawaiians had that. On to the next article, which is out of Unexplained Mysteries. And this is titled Mysteries Revisited, 3 Notoriously Cursed Horror Movies. Some of the world's most notoriously creepy movies continue to disturb and intrigue long after the credits rolled. Sometimes the most disturbing things about a movie happened off-screen rather than on camera. Poltergeist 1, 2, and 3, produced between 1982 to 1988. Directed by Tobe Hooper and produced by Steven Spielberg, the original Poltergeist told the terrifying tale of a family who became besieged by a malicious haunting that culminated in their youngest daughter being pulled through a portal to the other side. Tragedy would notoriously follow the cast and crew. However, with Dominique Dunne, who played Dana, being murdered by her abusive ex-boyfriend, Julian Beck, who played Kane, dying of a stomach cancer, Will Sampson, who played Taylor, dying of surgery complications, and perhaps most tragically of all, the film series' young protagonist Heather O'Rourke, dying of septic shock. Next was The Exorcist from 1973. When it was released, the original Exorcist was so terrifying that some unsuspecting cinema-goers ended up passing out in the theater. Things didn't go much better behind the cameras either. When shooting began in 1972, a fire tore through the set of Regan McNeil's home, causing extensive damage. In a peculiar twist, the room used for the actual exorcism scenes escaped unscathed. Actors Jack McGowan and Vasiliki Malarios both died shortly after filming had wrapped, and both Linda Blair and Max von Sydow suffered the loss of close family members during shooting. Jason Miller's son nearly died in a motorcycle accident, and several actors were injured on set. There's even a story of lightning striking a church opposite the cinema where the film was showing. Then The Omen from 1976, another supernatural horror classic. The Omen followed the story of Damon, a seemingly innocuous young boy who just happened to be the son of Satan himself. A mere 2 months before filming started, the son of actor Gregory Peck shot himself. Then, when Peck was flying to London in September, his plane was struck by lightning. The same thing happened to executive producer Mace Neufeld a few weeks later. Then producer Harvey Bernhardt narrowly avoided being struck by lightning while filming in Rome. The devil was at work and he didn't want that film made, he said. An animal handler who worked on the crazy baboon scene was mauled by a tiger shortly after filming wrapped. And on Friday the 13th, special effects artist John Richardson was involved in a car accident. While he escaped with his life, his passenger assistant Liz Moore was decapitated in a manner very similar to a scene in the movie that Richardson himself had worked on. To cap it all, a plane that was chartered by the film before being switched at the last minute went down a short time after taking off, resulting in the death of everyone on board. Yep. Now, our next article. This is out of also Eerie News. And this is titled, When Your Lover Wants Your Heart Along with the Rest of Your Organs. What's that saying about if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is? Blanca Arellano found this out in the most horrendous way. Blanca Arellano, 51, met Juan Pablo Villafuerte, a med student, 15 years her junior, online via a gaming app. Blanca, who lived in Mexico, was hooked, and on July 27, 2022, she completed a 3,000-mile trip to Huacho, north of Lima in Peru, to meet the man of her dreams. November 7th was the last time Blanca's family heard from her. There was nothing in her conversation to indicate there was a problem in the relationship. The couple had been living together for over 3 months. The Arellano family became alarmed when they lost touch with Blanca, and her niece, Carla Arellano, took to social media for help. She tweeted on November 12th, quote, "My aunt Blanca Olivia Arellano Gutierrez disappeared on Monday, November 7th in Peru. We fear for her life." End quote. These messages galvanized Peruvian authorities to investigate the whereabouts of Carla's aunt. When Carla communicated with Villafuerte, he said that Blanca was returning to Mexico after they broke up, which was opposite to what her aunt had told her in their last conversation. Blanca's family had no other person in Peru they could ask for help in verifying if their family member was okay, and were forced to accept Villafuerte's story that she had decided to return home after telling him that he couldn't offer the life she wanted. This behavior was totally unlike Blanca Arellano, who would not have decided to return to Mexico without communicating with her family. On November 10th, the mystery of Blanca's whereabouts came to a horrible resolution. It came in the form of a severed finger with a silver ring on it that washed up on a Chorrillos beach in Huacho. This was soon followed by a faceless head, an arm, a disemboweled torso with several broken ribs and all the organs missing. The finger was matched to Blanca. On November 17, Villafuerte was arrested on charges of human organs trafficking. Soon after Blanca disappeared, Villafuerte posted a video on TikTok where he dissected body parts that included a brain and pancreas. There's another video where he calmly narrates a dissection of a human stomach. Some of his videos had a warning about its contents being disturbing. Authorities brought blood-sniffing dogs to Villafuerte's home, which was only a rented room. Using luminol, blood splatters were found in the bathroom, also in the laundry room, and on his mattress. Police also found hair samples, luggage, clothing, and a Mexican flag. Villafuerte's landlady confirmed that Blanca had been staying in the room. Shortly after his arrest, there was an investigation by authorities into whether Villafuerte had an accomplice. It was found that on November 7th, which is believed to be when Blanca was killed, Edson Flores accompanied Villafuerte to a store in the Zona de Manzanares, where he bought cigarettes and 8 large garbage bags. Earlier in the day, Villafuerte had gone to a store where he purchased 2 gallons of lime and muriatic acid. Flores' brother came to police to say his brother was in Lima and not Huacho on November 7th, and that despite being a classmate of Villafuerte, he had no part in the murder. Authorities said that due to an ongoing strike at the university, the other rooms in the house were unoccupied by students, and there were no witnesses for them to interview. On November 21st, 2022, the prosecution requested a 9-month jail sentence for Villafuerte in order to prevent him fleeing while the case is being prepared. By then it has been confirmed that the other body parts that had washed up on the beach belonged to Blanca Arellana. When questioned, Villafuerte denied that Blanca was his girlfriend and that she was an indigent that he would occasionally help by giving her a little money to. Blanca's niece showed police the chats between her and Villafuerte, in which he claimed the relationship had ended because Blanca had grown bored with him. On December 16, 2022, Villafuerte's appeal was denied, and he will have to stay in jail for 9 months pending his trial. For Blanca Arellana, it was a wrong turn on Lover's Lane. You don't say. So I'm going to follow up on this story because after 9 months, let's see what happens. But that's horrible. That's horrible. Because if you think about it, maybe this man planned this all along. Maybe as far as seducing her and thinking, well, we'll let a couple of months go by and then, And believe it or not, there is, for people who think yes, there is a market out there for body parts. Not only organs, as in, because people think of, trafficking of organs like from a live person transplanted into another person. But no, there's a network of trafficking for human body parts from people that are dead. Now on to the next article, which is out of Singular Fortean, and it's titled "Witness Reports Encounter with Dark Red-Eyed Being That Took Off into the Sky Like a Literal Bat Out of Hell." This is in Southeast Michigan. Alright, and I think this was picked up from Lon Strickler's blog of Phantoms and Monsters. He's got a very good blog where a lot of people report strange sightings. And this was, again, this was an email from a witness who said that he and his sister were driving in southeast Michigan when they saw a dark red-eyed being that appeared to take flight. Strickler said the email was a follow-up to one sent by the witness about a month ago that was too vague to be published. And this is the content of what the person said they experienced. I don't really believe in any cryptids, though the idea of them is fun except for Mothman. Around the time of these sightings in mid-fall of 2017, I lived in a small town in southeast Michigan, Oakland County, and was attending high school. My older sister, who was 9 years my senior and had a similarly timed work schedule, drove me to school extra early every morning so I could attend an extra hour and fit another class into my schedule. It was awful and started at 6 a.m., but we only lived about 15 minutes from my school, so it wasn't all that bad of a drive. One morning we were making our way to the school, as per usual, through some super curvy wooden back roads by our house, a route we took every day. Suddenly, in a break between the section of the road we were on, just between the third curve and the last curve, before the road straightened out, I noticed two glowing red spots, about 600 to 800 feet in the distance. At first I brushed it off, as the area was known for deer and the spacing for eyes wasn't too far off, but I couldn't shake the wrong feeling I had. The eyes just weren't the right color to be reflecting deer eyes, and as we neared closer, it became apparent to me that if these indeed were eyes, then the figure was far too tall to be any type of animal I could think of. It was still really dark out, so I was only able to make out the eyes and a dark black silhouette before. As our headlights were finally near enough to begin illuminating the figure, it took off into the sky like a literal bat out of hell. It moved incredibly fast, and before it took off, the dark silhouette expanded significantly in a manner that was incredibly similar to how birds use their wings to take off. Before I could hardly register what had happened, it disappeared over the tree line and out of sight. At first I was worried I was seeing things. However, I looked over at my sister. I was met with a mirror of my same shocked expression. She asked incredulously if I had seen that too, and we began conferring about what we just saw. I was relieved to hear that I wasn't going crazy, as she described the same things I had also just seen. I still think about that morning to this day, and was surprised when a couple of years after it, I came across your article and reports. A lot of the sightings and encounters you compiled dated around the same time. I saw what I believe more and more every year had to be Mothman. Winged humanoids have not been reported as often in Michigan as they have in other states bordering Lake Michigan, with only one other sighting represented on the Singular Fortean Society's timeline. Alright, this report constitutes the latest news in a string of Mothman sightings from within a few hundred miles radius surrounding Lake Michigan, including every state bordering the Great Lake. These sightings ostensibly began in the spring of 2017, but more historical accounts are being reported as more people become aware of the phenomena. They generally take place in the evening or at night, often in or near a park or natural area and around water. Witnesses consistently described a large gray, brown, or black bat or bird-like creature, although in a small number of cases the creature was described as insect-like, sometimes with glowing or reflective red, yellow, green, or orange eyes, and humanoid features such as arms and legs are often reported. Some witnesses have reported feeling intense fear and an aura of evil emanating from the creature they encountered. Many of the sightings are also of something seen only briefly or described only as a flying creature with few details, which leaves open the possibility that a misidentified large bird, such as a heron or crane, or some type of anomalous avian species, could explain some, although certainly not all, of the encounters. A number of associated high strangeness incidents have also occurred alongside the creature sightings. These include reports of UFOs, other anomalous flying creatures, and mysterious humanoids, parapsychological phenomena, and bizarre events experienced by those investigating the sightings. Yes, and I have heard of this. And for some reason, they like I said, sometimes they people that track this have noticed that these sightings coincide with other things like cryptids, other cryptids and UFOs, stuff like that. Now going back to Eerie News, along the lines of what the previous article were about traffic in human remains. This article is titled Worth More Dead Than Alive Trafficking in Human Remains. Donating your body to science doesn't guarantee that it will be used for this purpose. Instead, it might become merchandise in a national network of human remains traffickers. Not even giving your body to a university can keep it safe. On Wednesday, June 14, 2023, Cedric Lodge, the morgue manager who worked at Harvard Medical School since 1995, was indicted. He is facing federal charges of selling heads, brains, skin, and other body parts. These were taken from cadavers donated to Harvard Medical School for research and education. Harvard fired him on May 6, 2023. He allegedly took the dissected body parts to his home in New Hampshire, 60 miles away, where he, along with his wife Denise, sold them to traffickers across the United States from 2018 through August 16, 2022. This was during the time he worked in the morgue, which received cadavers as part of the anatomical gift program. Harvard insists no other employees are facing charges. Lodge allowed buyers access to the morgue to make their purchase or ship them out, in some cases through the United States Postal Service. Buyers have also been named in the indictment. They are Joshua Taylor of West Lawn, Pennsylvania, and Katrina McLean of Salem, Massachusetts, who owned and operated a business called Cat's Creepy Creations in Peabody, Massachusetts. McLean resold some of the specimens to buyers in other states. One of them is Jeremy Polly, who is executive director and curator at the Memento Mori Museum, according to his Facebook. He owns the Grand Wunderkammer, which sells odd and unusual items to the public and to museum exhibits. Polly, 40, has previous arrest. In August of 2022, he was charged with abuse of a corpse, receiving stolen property, and dealing in the proceeds of unlawful activities. This involved Candace Chapman Scott, who worked at a crematorium who was partnered with the University of Arkansas. She's accused of selling the corpses of 2 stillborn babies meant to be cremated, and selling them instead to Polly. He is known to purchase pelvis antiques and very old skulls belonging to children. Prior to this, in October of 2020, McLean sold skin and 2 dissected faces for $600. Polly tanned the skin, making it into leather, and sold it back to McLean. In the indictment, Polly paid $8,800 to McLean and a total of $40,049 to Taylor, all through PayPal. An anonymous tipster notified authorities of finding several 5-gallon buckets of human remains in Polly's basement. This tip turned out to be accurate, and investigators found human brains, hearts, liver, skin, and lungs inside them. Polly has over 5,000 followers on Facebook. Harvard is now left trying to explain to the families of the deceased, who in many cases donated the body of their loved ones, that the corpses were desecrated and not studied. And for those of you who are watching the video version, this is a listing that Jeremy Polly had on Facebook, that I'm enlarging it. Sold out. Found a bunch of vertebrae, I believe 2 lots of 30 and the last lot of 20 ribs currently. PM as in, message him to claim will not ship to Tennessee, Georgia, Louisiana due to import ownership laws. He's got 2 pictures, one of vertebrae and another one of holding rib bones. But these are human, of course. And of course, this is his picture for those of you watching the video. And that's why, a lot of people, sometimes people have heard of human harvesting of human organs, but they always think of it as in harvesting them for live people. And that does take place. But there's also another market just for human remains. What people do with it, I know some are used for dark arts. There's people that I don't know are weird and decorate. I was surprised. And by the way, some of these parts, especially the fresher ones, a head with a brain is worth about $500. Yes, it's very disturbing, and it exists. Okay. Next article is out of Anomaly, and it's titled Women in the Rain, a cursed painting by Ukrainian artist haunts buyers. In 1996, an artist from Odessa, Ukraine, Svetlana Telets, painted a picture depicting a sad, pale woman in a strange black headdress standing in the rain. Svetlana sold this picture several times, but each time the picture was soon returned back due to the fact that strange phenomena began in the house of the buyers. Svetlana Telets is an artist specializing in surreal and abstract art. She was born in 1973 in Odessa and studied at the Odessa Krakow Art College. She has participated in numerous art exhibitions and received several awards for her work. According to Svetlana, 6 months before she created the infamous Woman in the Rain, she had a constant eerie feeling that someone was watching her closely, but she brushed it aside and went about her business. One bright, sunny day, she sat down in front of a blank canvas, contemplating what to paint. Suddenly the image of a woman appeared in her mind, clear as day, her face, colors, and shades. It was like magic, she said. Svetlana painted the bulk of the painting in 5 hours, as if someone was guiding her hand, and then she spent a whole month refining it until she felt the painting was complete. That's a very weird painting. Then Svetlana came to Vinica, where the art salon was located, and exhibited Rain Woman there. The painting immediately attracted the attention of local art lovers as well as buyers. The first buyer of Rain Woman was a businesswoman living alone. She hung the painting in her bedroom but soon regretted it. She felt like someone was watching her and she couldn't sleep at night, even after she took the picture off the wall. Please take it away, I can't sleep. It seems that there is someone else in the apartment besides me. I even took it off the wall, hid it behind the closet, but still I can't, she said, calling the artist on the phone. The second buyer, a young man, thought the painting would look great in his living room, but soon he also regretted his decision and returned it back to the artist. He was willing to pay half the purchase price just to get rid of the painting. He claimed that the woman in the painting haunted him, appearing to him every night in dreams or waking, not specified, and following him like a shadow. A third customer was interested in Rain Woman because he thought she was pretty nice. He was not even scared away by the words that the painting had previously been returned due to some anomalies and that the locals had already developed a bad reputation around it. But very soon he realized that buying the painting was a big mistake. According to him, the white eyes of the woman in the picture seemed to follow him everywhere, and it seemed to him that he was drowning in them. In the end, he returned the painting to the salon. At first, I didn't notice what white eyes she had, and then they began to appear everywhere. Headaches began, a reasonable unrest, he said. Svetlana herself says that each picture is created for a specific person, and that somewhere there is probably someone for whom her Rain Woman was painted who will not be disturbed by it. One of the journalists asked about the cursed painting of Archpriest Vitaly Goloskevich, candidate of theological sciences and priest of the Transfiguration Cathedral in Vinica. A person has a spirit and a soul. There are truly spiritual works of art, but there are also soulful ones. And the picture you're talking about represents precisely such spiritual art, and it does not come from God. There is such a thing, aftertaste, Vitaly said. Before buying a painting, I would advise you to listen to yourself, to your feelings that remain after contemplating the creation. The artist puts into the work the mood in which he was at the time of his writing, and it is not known who led the artist at that moment. Therefore, if it was something unclean, then even the consecration of the picture will not help. The last articles about this picture appeared in the Ukrainian media in the mid-2000s, and what is now with this picture is unknown. At that time, the painting Rain Woman stood without a frame in the same salon in Vinica and cost $500. Greetings, explorer. Well, there you go. That's very interesting. I had never heard of this. But this is a very, very odd picture. Very odd. Yeah, I see what you mean. She's looking down. It reminds me of a llama with a woman's face. What can I say? That's what it looks like to me. Okay. And last article here is out of Eerie News, and this is called Hiking into Oblivion. Hiking is great exercise and exposes you to nature. However, it can also become the gateway to death. Even tour guides are not impervious, as one got lost during a group trip. His name was Morgan Heimer, 22, of Cody, Wyoming. On June 2nd, 2015, the National Park Service received a report he had disappeared at Pumpkin Springs. The group was on the sixth day of an 8-day trip. He was last seen wearing a flotation device and carrying a water bottle. The search continued until late July, 7 weeks after he disappeared. And by the way, he was a guide. He was an experienced person in this. And still, at this point, they have no idea what happened to him, besides not finding him. Between 2018 to February of 2023, 1,180 persons have been reported missing from U.S. national parks. However, missing doesn't always mean dead, and some were found injured but alive. However, others were deceased either through accidents, exposure, or suicide. Data showed that Grand Canyon National Park had more deaths, missing person reports, and suicides compared to any other park. The cause of death, though, are known. Most of them are falls over the canyon, helicopter crashes, or overheating. Such is the story of Robert Woody, age 74, who on October 22nd, 2016 didn't return from a 4-day solo backpacking trip in Kings Canyon National Park. The last signal from his satellite device showed he was in the area of Barrett Lakes. Cold weather came in and overnight temps dipped below freezing. A search with over 60 officials and 2 helicopters covered the area where he was trekking through. Woody was described as an experienced hiker who was familiar with the area. However, by the end of October, the search was scaled back due to 2 to 3 feet of snow falling and winds of about 75 miles per hour, making conditions inhospitable for a search. It wasn't until July 2017 that Woody's body was discovered by a group of hikers on the Pacific Crest Trail. The body was 300 feet off the Bishop Pass Trail on a slope with debris and rocks. His family believed he was the victim of a rock slide. Charles Lyon was last seen in June of 2021, and Jong-Hein Won, like Lyon, left his car parked at the south rim of Arizona's Grand Canyon National Park as the only clue. In 2016, Floyd Roberts, 52, traveled all the way from Florida to disappear while participating in a backpacking trip with a group of hikers. The terrain where he disappeared near Kelly Tanks at Grand Canyon's Parashant National Museum is considered rugged. Resolution sometimes takes years because that's how long it takes to find a body, especially if it fell into a canyon. Scott Walsh disappeared in 2015, but it wasn't until 2021 that he was found accidentally by a search group looking for another person. Walsh was last seen stepping off a shuttle bus at the park's south rim. His clothing had blended in with the surroundings. The crew was searching for Gabor Bersesi Tomaskani, a Hungarian national who lived in Hong Kong. Las Vegas police had received a report in late July 2021 that he was missing while traveling in the Southwest. His auto was found in the parking lot at the Grand Canyon in August. His body was found a few days later, 430 feet below the canyon's rim at Yavapai Point. The ME determined he had died from injuries due to a traumatic fall, but an investigation was opened as to what led up to it. In December 2017, rafters on a day hike found the remains of a California man last seen in June of 2017. In 2015, rafters hiking through the canyon came across the wreckage of a small aircraft with human bones scattered nearby. This was about 30 miles northwest of Grand Canyon Village. The plane was stuck between 2 boulders and naturally concealed. It was a home-built plane piloted by Joseph Radford, who crashed in the canyon in March of 2011, possibly on purpose. In July of 2020, Barry Tragan, 68, disappeared from Glacier National Park in Montana. The only clue found was a pair of sunglasses that were thought to belong to him. The same month, Matthew Silveira, 32, disappeared from the Cape Cod National Seashore where his car was abandoned. Inside was camping gear and his cellular phone. In 2019, James Pruitt, 70, drove from his hometown of Etowah, Tennessee, to Rocky Mountain National Park. On March 3rd, rangers found his vehicle, which didn't have an overnight parking permit. They searched for him until March 11th, but by then 2 feet of snow had fallen at Glacier Gorge. They searched for him throughout the summer, but without any success. In 2016, Peter Jackson went out to Yosemite National Park. He texted his son and had paid to park at the White Wolf Campground until September 21st. He's never been heard of since then. In some cases, decades go by before a discovery is made, and the mystery of a hiker's whereabouts is laid to rest. In August of 2017, police in southwestern Switzerland found the remains of a German hiker who went missing 30 years before. Two hikers found a hand and a pair of shoes sticking out of the Holob Glacier, 6 miles east of the Matterhorn. The man went missing on August 11, 1987. The month before, authorities found the bodies of a Swiss couple who went missing 75 years before on the Sans Florent Glacier. Marceline and Francine Dumoulin set off on foot to feed their animals on August 15, 1942, but never returned. On June 5, 2023, two brothers went to scatter the ashes of a loved one near a tree they had painted as children near Molalla, Oregon. They became separated. Search and rescue volunteers went out into the area and located the body of the missing man, which appears to have died from some type of medical condition. So all in all, if you listen to these stories, you go from tour guides, which are super specialized and experienced, to hikers that also are experienced, to people who just think, oh, I'm going to hike, and sometimes inexperience, or in the case of this other gentleman where his family thinks he got, rocks fall on your head. In other words, and he even had a one of those signal devices from a satellite device. All right, but I'm telling you, you you have to think good and hard about going into a national park. Well, I hope you like this latest edition of Eerie News, and I will be back soon with you guys. Till then, take care.